disaster. We propose here today a timeline of the Central Baths building projects in relation to seasonal work in the world of Roman construction. We seek to combine archaeological evidence from the baths with snippets of information from other source material, written sources that reveal ancient know-how and building practices. Admittedly, these snippets are few and somewhat dispersed across time and region. Still, the idea to have a closer look at building activities going on in Pompei in 79 and to relate these activities to the moment of the eruption is new and worth a try. In any case, it is an approach that has remained untested so far, and we look forward to discussing our ideas with you afterwards. The line of argumentation unfolds in 5 parts. First, we will briefly present and discuss the status of the building project in 79 CE and outline some of the main principles and hypotheses, all based on the analyses of the baths published in our recent monograph. Second, we will discuss the sequence of the building activities and establish what remained to be done when Mount Vesuvius erupted and put an end to all activities in Pompei, including the building of the central baths. Third, we will discuss some written sources that shed light on building practices and that seem to reflect Roman ideas about seasonal building activities. Fourth, we will identify some possible clues and detail how this archaeological evidence from the central baths might help to narrow down a bit the period in which the eruption took place, a time span now ranging from August to well into November. Fifth and finally, we propose a timeline for the building of the central baths and connect this timeline to possible dates for the eruption, concluding with a suggestion for the period that seems to us the most plausible one. First, however, and as a conclusion of this brief introduction, it is important to underline the fact that the second half of the 1st century CE was crucial for the further development of Roman baths and bathing culture. A real boom in bath building started in the late Neronian Flavian period, not only around the Bay of Naples, but in the Roman world at large. This building boom in baths can be explained by a series of innovations, such as the invention of window glass, tubuli for wall heating, and heated vaults. Going to the baths on a regular basis became part of the Roman way of life. Moreover, in the late 1st century, the possibilities of concrete, opus caementicium, were fully explored and employed on a wider scale. And baths played a pioneering role here, first on a smaller scale in private baths, followed by large-scale public buildings. When Mount Vesuvius erupted, work in the baths was still in full swing. Had the baths been completed and put into use, they would have represented the state-of-the-art in Roman bath buildings. Because of this, we have reasons to believe that the baths were designed by an expert architect, who may have been the contractor for building the bathing block as well. This was not uncommon for large and prestigious building projects, as Vitruvius reminds us when talking about his own involvement in both the design and the construction of a basilica in Fanum Fortunae. In any case, the skills and experience that were needed to design and build these state-of-the-art bathing rooms, notably the heated rooms, allow for the assumption that a construction company specializing in the building of baths was hired to perform this part of the project. Other work in and around Insula 4, such as the building and finishing of the tabernae, the portico surrounding the balestra, and the interior decoration of the rooms, could be carried out by 1 or 2 local building companies. All evidence from the building points to rational and deliberate planning of construction activities and well-considered sequence of work that should prevent delays. Roman builders were well aware of the constraints and possibilities that various building materials represented. Reading Vitruvius' ideas on the different qualities of stone, sand and wood in Book 2, for example, clearly shows the importance of picking the right materials for different kinds of building projects. We may assume that experienced builders hired for expensive prestige projects, such as the central baths, possess this kind of know-how. Moreover, passages in Vitruvius' work and recommendations by other writers, such as Papantinus and Palladius, reveal a high degree of rational planning. With a closer look at the central baths, it is possible to detect such rational and careful planning of the work in the building. Evidence points at a series of well-considered steps that allowed for an efficient and hence cost-reducing sequence of work during the phases of construction and finishing the building.
The sequence. At the time of the eruption, the rough construction of the bathing plot, can you hear me? Yes. When was completed. All standing walls of the apoditerium area, the frigidarium, I say in Latin, not in English, no frigidarium, huh? It's okay? Tepidarium and caldarium were finished. The barrel walls of the frigidarium, tepidarium and caldarium, as well as the dome of the sudatorium, had been constructed as well. Nowadays, hardly anything is left of these walls. The excavators found the debris of the walls with a thick layer of lapilli on top of the collapsed walls, as was reported by both Giuseppe Fiorelli and August Mau in the late 1870s. The weight of the collapsing concrete walls damaged the hypocaust. Test trenches along the south and north wall of the tepidarium revealed that the hypocaust in this room had been installed, completely installed, just as a tubuli for wall heating. It became also clear that the damaged wall and hypocaust in the tepidarium resulted from the eruption. Oh, I need my sorry. Because we found lapilli in the lowest strata of the excavation trenches, fragments of rectangular teculae mamate in the excavation trenches point at heated walls. A novelty dating to the late Neronian period. The excavators removed the debris of the walls in all 4 bathing rooms without noticing such details. Given the fact that all heating installations were completed in the tepidarium and supported by the archaeological evidence of the caldarium and the sudatorium, we may conclude that the construction company responsible for the bathing block was more or less done. Working from the back to the front, that is from the south to the north, all heated rooms were provided with hypocaust wall and walled heating. The 2 pools of the caldarium and the one of the frigidarium, all 3 in masonry and lined with opus igninum, were also completed. The drains of the pools were also placed to facilitate the work of plumbers who had to arrange the water supply to and within the bathing rooms. The discharge of the wastewater was partially finished on the east side of the tepidarium in the service area by a channel that would direct the wastewater to the back street, the Vicolo del Tesmo. The water that eventually would have drained into the sewage system of the public latrine was under construction in the extra to the west of the bathing rooms. The summary of the evidence so far makes clear that the work carried out by the specialized workforce, the bath builders, had mostly been done. The following activities remain to be done. First of all, interior decoration of the rooms, probably with marble veneer for the floors, pools, and lower parts of the walls. The slabs of colored marble found in the palestra point to this type of decor and are another key for the intended grandeur and sense of luxury of the baths, if they had been completed. The shiny marble of floors and lower parts of the walls could have gained even more construction of the prominence in the sunlit rooms, thanks to large glazed window openings. The glazing of the windows was scheduled in all probability for the very fast stage of the project, given the fragility and the cost of window glass, a novelty that had been invented only shortly before. Most of the work had remained to be done was in and around the palestra. Building a portico plan for 3 sides had just begun. Several steel unpolished travertine blocks had been put in place, serving as a plinth in the columns. The last of these blocks still shows the bosses that still had to be removed. The gutter that had to run alongside the plinth was somewhat further executed, rounding the northwestern corner of the palestra. The channel for the discharge of water in the southern part of the palestra was in its initial stage. We were able to retrace the foundation layer here in one of the trenches. The same trench revealed the function of the basin at the west side of the palestra, a reused impluvium from a former atrium house, probably out of the 2nd century before Christ. At the west side of the palestra, a reused impluvium. This impluvium was served with provisional water supply for the building activities that were still going on, notably in the palestra itself. In the final stage of the building project, shortly before the delivery and opening of the bath, the basin would have been demolished and the southwest area of the palestra would have been leveled, that is, after the completion of the discharge channel towards the latrine. The final leveling was relatively easy. After all the construction of the outdoor swimming pool, Nathalie, at the east side had just begun. The cavity has excavated and the first layer of lava cementitium was put in place. Both Fiorelli and Mau mention the heap of sand next to the cavity, sand that was not removed away from the building site, but was meant to level the southwestern part, an area sloping down quite steeply because of the natural slope here. Trenches revealed the outer corners of the Nathalie and furthermore showed the foundation layer. The walls in cementitium had not been built yet. The underground channel in concrete had eventually would have let the overflow water from the Nathalie to the latrine had to be finished as well. In conclusion of this part of the analysis, the work that remained to be done could also be executed by local workmen, not specialized in the building of baths or the technical installations for heating that were part and parcel of building bathing establishments. Finally, most of the remaining work seems to have been less dependent on the time of the year and specific weather conditions such as frost and excessive rainfall.
The exception to this, however, was the water supply. The urban water system underwent major renovations at the time of the eruption as well. The baths were still awaiting a connection to the new urban water system under construction. We hypothesized in an earlier contribution that the baths would have had their own water tower to cater the high demand for water in the bathing rooms. Possibly a connection to the recently excavated water tower near Insula 2 in Region 5 was in the planning, but that remains a hypothesis as well. But the urban water system and the inner water distribution, that is the supply of the pools and labra with water, could have been carried out by local plumbers. possibly in close collaboration with an imperial workforce responsible for the renovation and maintenance of the Campanian aqueduct, the Aqua Augusta. Openings in the lower zone of the niches indicate the locations for the lead pipes, the fistulae, and as already mentioned, this preparative work by the specialized bath builders facilitated the work of the plumbers that remained to be done. Work on the water supply outside and inside Pompei takes us now to the heart of the matter. Written evidence points at the notion of a preferred building season. Frontinus is very explicit on this matter. In his treatise on the aqueduct supplying the city of Rome, he mentions the period from April to November as the most suitable period for building. The most suitable time for masonry work is from April 1 to November 1. Moreover, he recommends avoiding building in opus caementicium during the heat of summer, because moderate weather is necessary for the masonry properly to absorb the mortar and to solidify into one compact mass. For excessive heat of the sun is no less destructive than frost to masonry. Unquote. Frontinus is an interesting source here because his text is contemporaneous, only slightly later than the last phase of Pompei. Moreover, his ideas seem to reflect the know-how and practice of his time. Another contemporary snippet of information stems from the Villa Sora, interpreted by Fabrizio Pesando and Massimo Osanna as an agreement for the layers of plaster of painting. Yeah, there it is. An agreement for the layers of plaster of painting that had to be applied on the wall on which the graffito was scribbled. The translation reads, before the 1st of November to be applied here, 3 layers of plaster or 3 colors at a price of 1 sestertius and 14 asses. Again, the date of November 1 is mentioned as the date before which the agreed work had to be completed. Much older evidence is offered by a late 2nd century BCE inscription from Puteoli in the famous De Pariete Faciendo inscription. A building contract was literally set in stone. The work agreed upon, detailed in a couple of lines, entailed the building of a wall in opus caementicium. The contractor was made accountable for the finishing of the project and the delivery, the probatio, before the beginning of November. Apparently, building in concrete during wintertime was deemed undesirable, already 200 years before Frontinus' instructions. Likewise, the sense of what kind of activities were possible and how to deal with building materials in what season can be read in other passages. Vitruvius, for instance, is explicit on wood, and the late antique writers Faventinus and Palladius on the production of brick and tile.
Okay, clues from the bath. With the information from written sources in mind, we revisited the bath, trying to establish possible connections between archaeological evidence from the bath on the one hand and the recommendations from manuals or other sources on the other side. Could this kind of evidence help to underpin the dating of the eruption? We propose here today the 2 features we had identified that might serve as clues to pinpoint the eruption of 79 to a more exact date. The first indication, first indication is the first indication is the fact that the walls collapsed during the eruption, presumably at the initial stage. We've seen the lapilli in the Tepidarium trenches already, and again Fiorelli and Mau mentioned thick layers of lapilli on top of the collapsed walls. In other words, the collapse was caused by the earthquakes that coincided with the start of the eruption, the tremor terrae described by Pliny the Younger. So the walls collapsed because of seismic activity, not because of the weight of the lapilli. Moreover, as this reconstruction shows, a reconstruction that takes a specific gravity and hence the movements, the behavior of lapilli into account. Most of the lapilli in the first phase of the eruption would end up at the sides of the walls, not on top of these. So again, the weight of the lapilli cannot have caused the collapse of the walls. But why then did the walls in the central baths collapse, whereas the walls of other public baths, such as the stadium baths, survived, at least in part? The key here is the fact that the central bath walls had only recently been constructed and lacked their final compressive strength. This is the situation. This is the situation we found in the central bath, the bathing complex, and this is the original situation of the upper parts of the walls preserved. And here, as an example, we have the frigidarium with only a little trace of a wall, this one. And this is the only parts that have survived this eruption. And another part is this one, in the sudatorium in this room. And this is very dangerous room because it was hit by a bomb during a bomb ride in the Second World War. It was the most important room maybe in our bath. It's the one who was hit by a bomb. So we have an exact data for this. So, modern research, for example by Heinz Otto Lamprecht and more recently by Lynn Lancaster, has shown that it took months, if not longer, for Roman concrete to reach its final strength. The processes of binding of the mortar and the hardening of the concrete took more time than is the case nowadays with modern concrete. In other words, the walls were still fresh and simply not strong enough to withstand the earthquake that had preceded and accompanied the major explosion of the volcano. And we have here this chronological sequence of events. This was the first situation. At the beginning of Vesuvius, the walls collapsed completely. This is the study how they would have been, the lapilli would have been placed on the walls. We have found traces of the complete upper floor of the hypocaustum in the tepidarium in one of our scavi. And in the next phase of the eruption, the central bath looked like this. Every roof was away, the walls were collapsed. And then they were filled with this lapilli. And this is, it should have looked like this. The second aspect that provides us with possible chronological clues is the water supply. Apart from the provisional water supply, the final and permanent connection to the urban supply system was still lacking. As mentioned before, the urban water system in Pompei underwent major renovations at the time of the eruption. If we take Frontino's words seriously, at least part of that work was not carried out during the summer heat. We must be cautious here, since Frontino's text addressed the city of Rome exclusively. Still, his more general remark on the need for powers during the heat of the summer is of importance here, whereon the urban water supply had just started again. If you return to the works that remain to be done in the central baths, the only parts for which building in opus cementitium was still necessary are the construction of the narratio, the drain towards the latrine, and possibly the water tower under construction in the south of the bath. Hence, this was the last part of the buildings that had to be finished before the start of winter, before the 1st of November, if we keep that date from the written sources as a guideline. That is the deadline for building in concrete.
Where does all this lead us? Let us now consider possible scenarios and single out the most likely one, with the caveat, however, that we do not know how long a possible summer break would take. We do not even know, in case there was this habit of stopping construction work for some weeks, if this was a fixed period based on experience or an ad hoc break, flexible and depending on the start of the heat. The restriction for a flexible and ad hoc solution would be, however, that the ancient Roman weather forecast was less reliable than in modern times. In other words, we do not know for sure, but with regards to planning, it seems more logic that the architect or constructor who supervised the project would plan to complete the rough work in opus caementicium before, let's say, the calends or ides of July, so before the start of the heat. Installing the hypocausts, tubuli and tabulae mammatai for heating could, if still necessary, have been done during the heat of summer in the vaulted rooms that protected the workers against the sun, or in late summer, early autumn. After the summer heat, the work was resumed in the bathing rooms, perhaps, but certainly in and around the palestra. And this is the point where we are right now, with the list of work that remained to be done. Undoubtedly, it was possible to finish the water tower, the narratio caementicium walls, and the drainage channel towards the latrine before November. The finishing of the building, at least the interior decoration and glazing of the windows, and the leveling of the palestra could be partially executed, or at least be prepared, in the period November-April. The provisional water supply would still be needed for these building activities. Therefore, demolishing the reused impluvium, this provisional water supply, leveling the palestra, and finishing the portico on that spot would have constituted the very last part of the project. A completion of the building and the probatio before or shortly after the summer break of the year 80 would then be possible. There are two possible additional arguments for this timeline. The construction in opus caementicium required both skilled and unskilled labor. The carpenters who built the wooden formworks and the masons and bricklayers were experienced craftsmen. They were helped by a larger number of unskilled workers, the people that would cut the bigger stones into smaller caementa, or had to carry the caementa, the bricks and buckets full of mortar to the bricklayers high up on the scaffolding. Unskilled workers were usually hired for a short period of time, even on daily basis. It is from this very same group of people that landowners would recruit extra hands in late summer or early autumn to help bring in the harvest. In other words, if the bulk of the construction in caementicium was finished at the start of the harvest season, unskilled day laborers could move on to help bring in the harvest. Moreover, competition, so driving up prices, between construction and agricultural activities could be avoided this way. The second and perhaps stronger argument unfolds as follows. If we follow this timeline, all work by the construction company specializing in building baths would have been done. The remaining work, the narratio, the finishing of the tabernae, the portico, the connection to the urban water supply and the construction, and the leveling of the palestra could be done by local firms. The remaining workload was feasible. Constructing the bottom and side walls of the swimming pool in concrete was the last part of the project that ideally had to be finished again before the start of November. This seems more plausible than a planning in which most of the construction work still had to be done. if we assume a break during the summer heat and the wish for the completion of all rough construction in concrete before the start of winter, that is the 1st of November. This wish could even have been a stipulation in the builder's contract, the locatio conductio contract of the type we have seen before in Pompei. In conclusion, combining all these snippets of information from both text and the evidence from the central base, our interpretation allows for a conclusion that for this moment, an eruption in autumn seems to be the most likely scenario. In accordance, perhaps, with the graffiti found in the Casa del Giardino in Pompei, the Villa Sora, even though these graffiti can be of earlier years, but still in the Villa Sora case, the date of 1st November is more important. And it is supported by the much earlier inscription from Puteoli and Fontaine's contemporaneous text. All this leads to us at this stage that a date in autumn, September or October is the most logical date for the fatal eruption. Thank you very much.